who gave almost everything they had to send their son off to college. But after just one semester, he failed to see the value in a college education. He failed to see the value in what he was doing. He couldn't justify his parents spending their entire life savings for him to be there, and so he decided to drop out. And instead of going to classes, he decided to pursue his passion, to pursue the things he was really interested in. And he and a friend started a small company in his parents' garage. After just 10 years of working harder than he ever thought possible, day in and day out, barely eating or sleeping, giving everything he had to this passion project, he grew this tiny company of he and his friend, of just 2 employees, into a company worth over $2 billion with over 4,000 employees. And then, in the middle of the night, just like that, everything he built, everything he created was taken out from under him. He was fired from his own company. He wasn't just fired. He was publicly humiliated on the world stage. Every magazine, newspaper in the world covered the story of how he had been fired from his own company, what a failure he was. What would you do? Imagine, you're 30 years old. You have more money than you can possibly spend in your entire lifetime. Where do you go from there? What do you do? How do you pick yourself up? I know if it was me, I'd probably buy an island somewhere and spend the rest of my life just hiding. The rest of my life sitting on a hammock with a Corona in one hand, maybe a good book or a movie in the other, and just be done. Retire. But that's not what Steve Jobs did. Steve Jobs picked himself up and he started over again. During the time he was fired from Apple, he started 2 companies. One of them called Pixar and the other called Next. Most of us have heard of Pixar, especially those of you with children. If you have kids, you know what an impact Pixar has had on an entire industry. It was a game changer. But it's the other company, Next, the one that most of us never heard of, that has revolutionized our world. See, I remember Apple as a kid. We had these big, clunky Apple computers with the floppy disk you needed 2 hands to hold, and you would shove it into the drawer, and you'd crank that little lock just to get it to work. How did we go from that Apple to the Apple we have today? I'm filming this right now on my MacBook Pro. I have my watch on my wrist. I have my phone in my pocket. I have the handout on my iPad. Where did it all come from? All of the technology that led to the renaissance of Apple, all of that technology was developed at Next. In fact, in a commencement address at Stanford University, Steve Jobs said that getting fired from Apple was the single greatest thing that ever happened to him. Not that it wasn't so bad, not that it wasn't painful or difficult, but rather it was the most important thing that ever happened, because without getting fired from Apple, we would still have those clunky gray boxes with the floppy disks and the crank. All of the technology that Apple has developed, all of the things that we love about Apple, all of that happened as a direct result of getting fired, says Steve Jobs. Oftentimes, it's those moments of greatest challenge, those moments where we're beaten down and we have to suffer the most difficult and extreme circumstances. Often it's exactly those moments that make us who we are. It's those defining moments that make us into the people that we can become. Let's take a look now at source number 1. This comes from the book of Micha. And the prophet writes, "Do not rejoice over me, my enemy. Ki nafalti kamti. Because I fell, I will arise. Because I sit in darkness, God is a light unto me." Notice it doesn't say, despite I fall and I get up. It says, Ki nafalti kamti. Because I fall, I get up. We find the exact same idea in source number 2. The book of Proverbs writes, because the righteous one falls 7 times, he will arise. Again, we find that word ki, not despite the fact that the righteous falls. Ki sheva yipol tzadik v'kam, because he falls, he gets up. Ki nefalti kamti, because I fall, I arise. It's not despite, it's because of. Often it's those moments of greatest challenge, those moments of greatest difficulty that make us who we are. The darkness is the source of the light. The Hebrew word mashbir can either mean a crisis or it can mean the birthing stool. Someone who didn't know any better, who saw a woman in childbirth, would be convinced that the woman was dying. How could it be anything else? You see this woman, and if you had no idea what childbirth looked like, you had no idea what was happening, you would be convinced that she was being killed. And yet, it's the mashbir. It's the birthing stool. It's that which gives life. We had 2 children born in Israel and 2 children born here in America. And the contrast between the 2 experiences is like night and day. I'll never forget when we had our first kid here in America. So our Atara was born here in Denver, and my wife gave birth in a midwifery practice. As Jim Gaffigan says, we use a midwife because we believe in witchcraft. No. We went to this midwifery practice at the University of Colorado, fantastic practice, and Sarah Drexler, if you're watching this, she was our midwife. They did a phenomenal job, and we are so, so grateful. But one of the things that was so shocking to me was how quiet the whole experience was. From the time we went in for labor and delivery till the time our Atara was born and we brought her home, I did not see another male. I was the only man in the entire, literally beginning until the end. All of the doctors and nurses and midwives were all women. I didn't see another patient, another father, another visitor, literally nobody. When we were being wheeled out, I asked the nurse, just on average, how many babies are delivered every night here? And she said, in a general, in a typical 24-hour period, they have about 2 or 3 babies. Guess how many babies are born in Shaarei Tzedek, the hospital in Jerusalem where my first 2 kids were born? They deliver on average 61 babies a day. 61, like 30 times that of an American hospital. So as you can imagine, the experience was quite different. In Shaarei Tzedek, you're lucky to get a small little closet of a delivery room. In Denver, we had what looked like the presidential suite at the Hilton. So in Jerusalem, in Shaarei Tzedek, they have these doors in every delivery room that open up into what I call the hallway of hell. This is a hallway for the fathers to kind of escape and take a little breather. But the sounds that echo in that hallway are terrifying. You have dozens of women, Jews and Arabs, who are delivering babies at the same time, and all the sounds from all those delivery rooms just echo and bellow down this hallway. If you can imagine, it sounds like a torture chamber. To this day, I can close my eyes and hear those screams, those howls. If you didn't know any better, you would think those women were being murdered, and yet they're giving life. That's the mashbir. That is the nature of the crisis. Often, that crisis is the moment of birth. It's the moment where life begins. It's all a matter of perspective. I can see it as the crisis, or I can see it as the birthing stool. It's those moments of challenge that define who we are, those moments of challenge that make us into the people we can become. When Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, runs away from his brothers trying to kill him, he goes and he settles by Lavan, and he works for him, and Lavan takes advantage of him, and he wasn't the nicest of people. Cheats him time and time again. Finally, it's time for him to leave Lavan, and he's going to start a life with his family, and he's told that his brother Esav is pursuing him, trying to kill him. So he sends a message. And this is source number 4. He says to the people who come on behalf of Esav, he instructed them as follows: "Thus shall you say to my lord Esav, so said your servant Yaakov, Jacob, I sojourned with Lavan and remained until now. Im Lavan garti va'echer ad ata." So Rashi, who's our classic commentator, and I call him our classic commentator because in Jewish learning we cannot take 2 steps without Rashi. Rashi's job is to help us understand the words in front of us. And he wrote commentary on practically everything. So Rashi says, he gives us another explanation of what this means. Take a look, source number 5. Another explanation is the word garti, the Hebrew word garti, has the numeric value of 613. As if to say, I lived with Lavan and I kept the 613 commandments. Yaakov sends the message to Esav. Don't try messing with me. Im Lavan garti. I spent this time with Lavan, and despite being with Lavan, I've kept all the mitzvot. But Rav Hutner explains once again, it's not despite being with Lavan. It's as a result of Lavan. Because I've endured the experience, the challenge, the difficulty of living with Lavan, as a result of that challenge, I have grown in my keeping of mitzvot. I have grown in my spiritual level, and if you try to mess with me, it's not going to go well. It's not despite, it's as a result of. A Jew is greatest when he is challenged. That is what makes us who we are. The Jewish approach is always, as we see in source 3, Rava, and some say Rav Chizda, said if a person sees that suffering has befallen him, he should examine his actions. It doesn't say that that's why it's happening. We don't know why it's happening. I'm not a prophet. I can't possibly know the ways of God. I can't possibly know why this thing is happening to me. But the Jewish approach is always Yifa'ash Fesh B'Ma'asav. Look into your actions. Try to figure out what it is that I can do to grow from the experience. I can't always choose the outcome of my actions, but I can always choose how I respond in any given situation. And my response is game-changing. My response can transform something from a crisis into the birthing stool, into the mashbir. It's all a matter of that perspective. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Figure out how you can learn, how you can grow from the experience. We see this once again from none other than Jacob. Let's take a look at source number 6 from Genesis 32:27. Yaakov said, and he's speaking to the angel of Esav, to Esau, he says, I will not release you until you bless me. Just some background into the story. Yaakov is going with his family. They're fleeing Lavan and then Esav. And he leaves some pachim katanim, these small jugs, behind. So he has his family wait for him as he goes on the other side of the river to collect these belongings that he left. As an aside, we learn from this how precious everything is to righteous people, because they recognize that everything we have, every item we own, every object that we acquire has been given to us specifically in order for us to fulfill our unique mission in this world. So even something as insignificant as these small jugs, for Yaakov, who is somewhat of a wealthy person, he still goes back to get them. So he goes and he gets the jugs, and while he's there, he gets attacked or ambushed by the Sar Shal Esav, the angel of Esav. And the two of them battle throughout the entire night. Whether this is a physical altercation or some sort of spiritual or emotional fight is not so clear. But we're told that Yaakov wrestles with the angel. That, by the way, is where our name Yisrael comes from. The idea that he fought with the angel and that he succeeded. Again, an aside. So the two of them are fighting, and they fight all night long. Finally, the sun comes up, and it's time for the angel of Esav to go back up. And he says to Yaakov, let me go. It's time. I need to leave. Yaakov says, no, I will not let you leave until you bless me. What Yaakov is teaching us is we can never let a challenge leave us until it blesses us. We can never leave an experience until we've learned from it, until it has blessed us, until it becomes the defining moment in our lives. It doesn't mean that's why it happened, but we can transform that into one of the reasons why it happened. We can choose to learn and grow from the experience. We never know why certain things happen. But we have faith that despite the darkness we see right now, that one day, ki nafalti kanti, one day that darkness will be the source of light. It will define my life and make me into the person I know I can become. There was a rabbi and his wife who received their very first position out of rabbinic school in an old community in Brooklyn. And this once vibrant community had kind of fallen apart. The shul itself, the actual physical building, was in complete disrepair. The community had mostly moved out. And they hired this young, energetic rabbi and his wife in the hopes that they can breathe new life into this community. And they were eager and excited to get working. So first things first, they had to renovate the shul building. So they come in and they begin renovations. They begin painting and cleaning up the mess and doing everything they can to make it as open and inviting and appealing of a space as possible. And their goal was to get everything done in time for a grand opening on Purim night. People would come, they'd hear the Megillah, they'd see this beautiful new renovated shul, and they get more involved in the community. They decide to stay. They decide to give it a chance. So they begin these renovations and they finish ahead of schedule, 2 weeks before Purim. That day, New York had a huge snowstorm. The next morning, the rabbi walks in to survey the damage to see what happened. And he walks into the shul and he is broken. He looks at the main wall, the Mizrach wall, straight up ahead in the shul, and right there, the ceiling had caved in. Snow had dripped in the wall and ruined all of the plaster, all the drywall. It looked horrible. He knows how important first impressions are, and he says to himself, he had no choice. He has to cancel the grand opening, because if people come and that's what they see, they're never going to come back again. So he goes home to tell his wife, and as he's walking the block and a half to his apartment, he notices that there's this garage sale going on, and something catches his attention. It's a tablecloth with a big Star of David in the middle. And all of a sudden, this light bulb goes off in his head, and he says to himself, wait a second. I bet that tablecloth is the perfect size to cover the discoloration on the wall. So he buys the tablecloth, and he decides he's going to go and he's going to put it up on the wall, and he'll put it up as a wall tapestry. No one will know that it's not meant to be there, and the show can go on. He's so excited. It's as if this special gift was given to him directly from God himself. So he buys the tablecloth, he runs back to the shul, and as he's about to go into the shul, he sees this old lady running after a bus, and the bus just drives off. Those who've lived in Israel or been to Israel, that happens more often than I'd like to admit. But the woman is running with the bubby cart in tow, and she realizes she's not going to catch up. The bus is not stopping. It drives off. She is there, sad, and now it's cold, and it starts snowing again. And even though the rabbi is so excited to get this tablecloth on the wall to see if it will fit, he walks over to the lady. He is a rabbi after all. And he walks over to the lady and says, I see you missed your bus. That's so frustrating. And he begins talking to her. It turns out that she lived in Staten Island. She was only in Brooklyn for the day. He knew the next bus was not for another 45 minutes. So he says to the lady, again, it had already started snowing again. He says to her, why don't you come sit down inside? It's nice and warm inside. It's freezing out here. The next bus isn't coming for another 45 minutes. So just come inside, I'll get you a nice warm drink, and you can wait here, and then you'll get the bus. So she agrees, and he helps her with her bubby cart. They go inside the shul. He gets her set up in one of the back pews. He makes her a nice warm tea, and then he gets to work trying to hang up this tablecloth. So he gets out his hammer and nails, he begins putting it up on the wall, and it's perfect. It fits the space beautifully. He is so excited. He can't wait to go tell his wife about all the things that just happened. And as he's walking away, stepping back to admire his work, he sees the old lady. But now she's not sitting in that back pew anymore. Now she's standing in the middle of the aisle, and she is white as a ghost. He runs over and he says, "Is everything okay?" She says, "Rabbi, where did you get that tablecloth?" He begins telling her the whole story of the snowstorm and the ceiling and the wall and the discoloration and the garage sale. And she says, "Rabbi, look in the corner. Do you see the initials ECB crocheted into the right corner of that tablecloth?" He hadn't noticed it before, but he walks over, and lo and behold, they're there. She says, "Rabbi, I crocheted that tablecloth with my own 2 hands back in Poland during the war. I remember the moment I finished it, and we put it on our Shabbat table, and it was beautiful. That next day, my husband urged me to run away. They got papers. He urged me to go, and I begged him not to make me do it. But I did. And I escaped, but my husband never made it. This tablecloth was the last thing, the only thing that she had from her previous life. The rabbi urged her to take it. He said, "Take it, please. It's yours." But she insisted and said, "No. I'd rather it be here in the shul, and I'll come back. I'll come to the shul, I'll see it on the wall, and it will give me so much joy to see it here, to remember what life was like before it all went to hell." The rabbi and this woman sat there in the pews, just crying together as he heard all the stories of what life was like before the war and the tragedy and the hell on earth that she experienced. And by this time, she had missed the next bus and the bus after that, so the rabbi agreed to drive her home. So he drives her all the way to Staten Island. He helps her into her apartment, up the 3 flights of stairs with her bubby cart. He says goodnight and invites her to come to the grand opening on Purim night. She says, "It's difficult for me to get out, but I'll try to make it." 2 weeks go by, and now it's time for the grand opening, and it goes wonderfully. New people come, and they have a great time, and they enjoy everything that the shul has to offer. When the Megillah reading is over, the rabbi and his wife stood at the door, greeting each guest as they left, bidding them farewell, hoping that they come back. They're about to shut off the lights and go home, and they see this elderly gentleman sitting in one of the pews. He says, "Rabbi, where did you get that tablecloth? It looks just like one that my wife crocheted back in Poland." And he begins telling the rabbi this very familiar story, a story that he just heard before. So he takes this elderly gentleman and he says, "Do you mind coming with me for a drive?" And the two of them go for a drive all the way to Staten Island. He walks them up the 3 flights of stairs, knocks on the door, and he said he witnessed the most beautiful Purim miracle ever. He witnessed the most beautiful Megillah. At every moment of that story, snowstorm comes, the roof and wall are damaged. If you froze that in time and you said, "Is that good or is that bad?" for sure you'd say, "That's bad." Woman missing her bus, good or bad? It's terrible. The worst thing that could possibly happen at that moment. And yet, that woman missing her bus was the greatest thing that ever happened to her. All things are good in the end. If it's not good, it's simply not the end. We never know which part of the story we're currently in right now. We can never connect the dots in life going forward. We can only live life with the faith that one day those dots will somehow connect. On Rosh Hashanah, as we know, we blow the shofar. And there are different types of shofar blasts. We have a tekiah, which is a strong, triumphant blast. It's the kind of blast that we blow when it's the beginning of the Jubilee year or when we're inaugurating a king. But then we have the shavarim and the teruah, which are broken sounds. They're meant to sound like weeping or wailing, crying. There's an interesting halacha, an interesting law. Whenever we blow the shofar blasts, we never blow the shvarim or the teruah by itself. You never find the blasts that represent crying and wailing on their own. They always come preceded and followed by a tekiah. They always come in the middle of a tekiah sandwich. Tekiah, then shvarim, then tekiah. The lesson is clear. The lesson is that even if I'm in a moment of a teruah, I'm in a moment of crying, a moment of despair, I need to understand that there's always a tekiah around the corner. They say that the darkest moment is always the moment right before the dawn. It's exactly at that moment, the moment of despair and challenge and crisis, that leads me to the next, that leads me to the dawn of the tekiah, of the strong, triumphant blast. It's always good in the end. If it's not good, it's not the end. We have another interesting halacha, an interesting law. We never end a parsha, a Torah portion, on perennials, on something negative, which seems silly. Come on. These stories happened a long time ago. We're grown-ups. We can handle a bad ending. Why can't we end where it's supposed to end? But the answer is, if it's a negative note, if it's something negative, it's something bad, it's not the end. It can't possibly be the proper end of the parsha. It can't be the end of this episode, because the end of the episode is always good. If it's not good right now, it's not the end. The problem is that we can't always see through to the other side. When we're going through a moment of difficulty, we're going through a challenge, we're going through a crisis, we can't see past it or beyond it. I can't see the label when I'm inside the jar. The Hebrew word tsar means pain. You're probably familiar with the Jewish yenta who has all of her tsaras. That's just plural of the word tsar. Tsar means pain, a difficult challenge. That word is intimately connected to the word tsar, which means narrow. Anytime we find two Hebrew words that mean the same thing or share a root, it means that there's a common denominator. There's a common theme that both of these words, both of these concepts have. So what's the connection between tsar, pain, and tsar, narrow? Anytime a person is in a situation of pain, anytime a person is going through an ordeal, a challenge, bigger than the pain itself, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual pain, any type of pain bigger than the actual pain, is the fact that they are in a tsar, in a narrow place. They can't see past it. When we are in a place of narrowness, when we go through life with those blinders on, I can't see anything but my pain. I can't just lift myself out. I need to widen that space. And only once I widen that space can I move past it. We just finished the period of time known as Bein HaMetzarim, 3 weeks where we are between the straits, where we're constricted, where we're placed in this narrow space and we can't see past it. We can't see the big picture. In life, we can never connect the dots going forward. We just don't know where they're going to connect. We can only connect them going backwards. But we live life with the faith that one day those dots will connect. I remember when I was still living in Israel, I was so fortunate to be able to learn and teach at the Aish World Center. Talk about real estate. This is a piece of property that is directly opposite the Western Wall. So every day, from the place that I sat in the study hall or the classroom where I would teach, I would see the Western Wall right outside the window. But there was something fascinating. Constantly, whenever I'd come into yeshiva in the morning, I would bike through the old city and I would see tourists from all over the world and residents that were all so different, so unique. Towards the end of my tenure at Aish, right before we moved to Colorado, there was a woman who was working on a painting, and this was the largest canvas I'd ever seen in my life. Every morning, she'd come with a few people coming to help her, and they would set up this massive, massive canvas. And every evening, they would take it all apart, and they'd have to re-stretch it and reset it up every single day. But it was so interesting watching her paint. She would, and this was right on that balcony, right before the steps to the Kotel itself. So right at the end of Aish. For those who know where the gold menorah used to be, they moved it to the Chorva, to that big square, but where it used to be, right overlooking the western wall. So she would set up this huge canvas, and she would be right in front of it painting. But every 10 or 15 minutes or so, she would walk all the way up the stairs. She would look, and then come back down and paint. And then 10 minutes would go by, she'd walk up the steps, look, and keep on painting. You see, she couldn't possibly see what she was painting standing at the canvas. At the canvas, all she could see is blurred colors. It's only when she took all those steps up, where she took those steps back, that she was able to see the full picture. And when she was able to see the full picture, she knew what she was looking at. The problem is that we go through most of our life with our nose against the canvas. We don't see the big picture. We don't even see what we're looking at. All we see are those blurred colors. And we say, you call this a painting? You call that the Western Wall? All I see is browns and grays and whites. We can only see the picture when I take that step back. The difficulty is that at many moments in life, there aren't enough steps. I can't stand far enough back to see the perspective. As Jews, we believe in reincarnation. That means my soul has been here many times before this one. How could I possibly think that I understand the ways of God? That I know what my soul needs right now, this particular moment of this iteration of its existence? How? To think that I understand the ways of God is at best silly and at worst arrogant. I can't possibly see the big picture because I can't zoom out far enough. But I live life with the faith that those dots will connect, that there is a bigger picture, that all things are good in the end, even if it's not good, it's not the end. I'm just not at the end of the story yet. Sometimes I am given the gift of perspective. Sometimes, even if it's difficult now, I can step back far enough to say, you know what? I see now, like Steve Jobs said, that this is the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it was difficult, even though it was challenging. As children, and every person who's watching this is someone's child, there are things that our parents did to us and did for us that we didn't understand at the time, but we know now they did for our best interest. I remember when my oldest son, Ozzy, was 1.5. He had several bouts of pneumonia. So we had to take him in to get some chest x-rays. Now, when you take a child for chest x-rays, it's a difficult process. So for an adult, they just stand up, they take the x-ray, and you're done. But with a child who can't stand up, you have to lay them down on this table, and if they move, even a drop, you have to do the whole thing over again. So they instruct the parent, in this case it was me, to pin down my child on this metal table, and then they do the x-ray. And I remember looking down at my son as he's looking up at me, and he can't talk yet, but he is shouting with his eyes. He's in this room and it's scary looking, and there's lights, and he's sitting on this cold metal table and it's uncomfortable and he's scared. And he looks up at me and he begins shouting with his eyes and he says, "Daddy, how could you let them do this to me? I thought you loved me. I thought you were my father who was supposed to protect me and take care of me." There's no way I could have explained to him in that moment that I was doing this not to hurt him or harm him, that I was doing this specifically because I loved him. He couldn't possibly understand that. But I hope at one point in his life, when he's old enough, he'll understand. We don't always get that perspective, but when we do, we have to take it. We have to be able to look back at our lives. to see moments of challenge, moments of crisis, where at the time I was stuck in the jar and I couldn't see the label. At the time, I looked at it and I would have said, this is terrible, this is bad. But now that I have time on my side, now that I have perspective, I can say I know that that was for the best. And the more I do that, the more I'll have the faith that when it's dark, where I don't see how this is good, I'll trust that there is a plan. I'll trust that there's a bigger picture, even if I can't see it. The Rambam, Maimonides, compares it to being lost in the dark night. I'm trying to find my way home, and I can't see anything because it's pitch black. But then all of a sudden, there's a crash of lightning. And in that moment, I see everything with clarity. I see exactly how to get home. I have to go straight here, make a left there, make a right there. But now it's pitch black again. I have to reconstruct that image in my mind. And that's what I do. And I go and I try my best to reconstruct that image and to find my way home. And then another flash of lightning. And I see it again, and now I can correct course a little bit. We don't get that many flashes in our lives. But when we get them, we need to take advantage of them. There's a difference between understanding that this is truly good and saying this is for the good. Let's take a look now at the next page, source number 7. This comes from Brachos 60b. A man should always accustom himself to say, whatever the All-Merciful does, he does for the best. As when Rabbi Akiva was journeying by the way, he came to a certain town and asked for hospitality, but he was refused. So he shows up at the inn, and there's a no vacancy sign. What's he going to do? Nowhere for him to stay. So he exclaimed, Kol man da'amad Rahman al-Tav, anything God does, he does for the best. He went and spent the night in the field, having with him a rooster, a donkey, and a lamp. A gust of wind came and extinguished the lamp. A cat came and ate the rooster, and a lion came and devoured the donkey. So I don't know about you, but if that was me at that moment, I'd be like, ooh, that's not so good. What does Rabbi Akiva say? He exclaimed, whatever the All-Merciful does is for the best. That same night, a band of robbers came and captured the town. He thereupon said to them, didn't I say everything Hashem does is for the best? Let's take a look now at the next source. The Gemara mentions a man named Menachem ish Gamzu. It wants to know, why did they call him Menachem of Gamzu? The reason is that with regard to any matter that occurred to him, he would always say, Gamzu latova, this too is for the good. Rabbi Akiva's expression stated, everything God does is for the best. What that means is right now, it's not good. Right now, as the child is scared, sitting on the metal table with the scary lights, and he's being pressed down, it's bad, it's painful, it's difficult. I can't say this is good because I don't really feel that it's good. But I know it's for the best. I know that I love my Father, and I know that He loves me. And I know if He's doing this to me, it's for my own benefit. It's for my good. I know that. Kol man da'avad Rahman l'tav avid. Anything God does, even if right now it seems bad, it's for the good. I don't see the full story. I can't see the full picture yet. Menachem ish Gamzu took it a whole nother level. He said, Gamzu latova, this too is good. Not just that it's for the good. This is good. There are moments in our lives where we feel pain and we feel difficulty and we go through challenges and we don't know why they're happening to us. And in those moments, we don't need to fool ourselves into saying that I feel good right now. No, I feel pain. I feel the difficulty. I feel the tsar. I feel the walls closing in on me. But I take solace in the fact that one day I might be able to see the picture. I might be able to see the reason, and it might not be in this world. Moshe asked the Almighty, he said, show me your ways. He asked God, why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? And God says, you cannot know that and live. You can know that, you can live, you can't do both. As a human being, you are limited in your ability to see the full picture. But sometimes we're granted the gift to be able to look back, to see with perspective. Like Steve Jobs, looking back, he said, it's not just that it wasn't so bad. Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to me. Going through that challenge, going through that ordeal was the best thing that could have possibly happened because it created the person I am today. Either way, we have to be able to see that big picture. Either way, we have to be able to declare and to understand for ourselves all is good in the end. If it's not good, it's simply